There's a basic biological reality that half of all humans have dealt with, every month, for essentially all of human history. And yet, it's one of the least discussed topics in the story of our past. So, how did women in the ancient world actually manage menstruation, with none of the products we take for granted today? Right away, it's worth being honest about the limits here. Menstrual materials, cloth, moss, plant fiber, rarely survive in the archaeological record. And for much of history, menstruation was considered a private or even taboo subject, rarely written about by the historians and scholars whose records survive. A lot of what we know comes from indirect evidence, ethnographic comparison with more recent traditional societies, and the occasional surprising written source. Prehistoric evidence is scarce, but anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies offer the best clues. It's widely believed early humans used what was already on hand: soft moss, absorbent grasses, and shredded plant fibers. Materials chosen simply because they were available, absorbent, and replaceable. Animal hides, softened and worked the same way clothing was, likely served as reusable material in colder climates. In warmer regions, plant fibers like softened bark or woven grass may have been preferred. None of this was standardized. It almost certainly varied by climate, available resources, and what individual communities had already learned worked well. For nomadic and hunter-gatherer groups, managing menstruation also meant managing it while still working, walking, hunting, or foraging. Life didn't stop. Materials needed to be practical, easy to replace, easy to clean or discard, and not so bulky that they interfered with daily movement. Comfort and function, not appearance, likely drove these early choices. Across many cultures, worldwide and across a huge span of time, menstruating women were separated into designated spaces, sometimes called menstrual huts, during their cycle. These practices ranged enormously. In some traditions, this was framed as a restrictive taboo rooted in fear of impurity. In others, it was closer to a sanctioned rest period, a break from daily labor. The meaning behind the same basic practice could be almost opposite, depending on the culture. Many ancient and traditional cultures developed beliefs framing menstrual blood as dangerous, unclean, or spiritually powerful, sometimes all three at once. Some agricultural societies avoided letting menstruating women near crops or food stores, fearing it would spoil them. These beliefs shaped daily restrictions around cooking, religious participation, and physical contact in ways that varied enormously by region. Not every culture framed it negatively, though. Some indigenous traditions viewed menstruation as a source of spiritual power, connected to fertility and life-giving energy, treated with respect rather than avoidance. A handful of societies built entire coming-of-age ceremonies around a girl's first period, celebrating it rather than concealing it. In ancient Egypt, medical texts like the Ebers Papyrus, dating back over 3,500 years, contain some of the earliest written references to menstrual health remedies. Some historians believe ancient Egyptian women may have used softened papyrus, or rolled and softened lint, as an early absorbent material, though direct evidence remains limited and somewhat debated among scholars. Greek and Roman writers, including the physician Hippocrates, wrote extensively, if not always accurately, about menstruation, often tangled up with broader, and frequently wrong, medical theories about the female body. Some historical sources suggest wrapped lint or wool was used as absorbent material, wealth and access likely determining what materials were realistically available to any given woman. In medieval Europe, menstruation was often filtered through religious frameworks, tangled up with ideas of sin and impurity borrowed from religious texts, which shaped social restrictions around church attendance and communal spaces. Practically, most women likely relied on reusable rags, washed, dried, and reused cycle after cycle, out of necessity rather than choice. For the overwhelming majority of human history, right up until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, across most of the world, the basic technology barely changed. Some form of reusable cloth or rag, washed and reused, was the default. This wasn't a prehistoric-only solution. It was standard practice almost everywhere, for almost all of history, right up until shockingly recently. Commercial disposable pads began appearing in the late 1800s, though early versions were expensive and slow to catch on. The modern tampon, as we recognize it today, wasn't patented until 1929, meaning cloth and homemade solutions remained the norm for most women worldwide well into the 20th century, not the exception. From moss and softened hide to sacred ceremonies and rigid taboos, to reused cloth passed down for generations, the history of menstrual management is really a history of resourcefulness and of how differently the same basic biological reality has been understood across human cultures. It's a part of history that rarely makes it into the story we're usually told, but it shaped the daily lives of literally half of humanity for all of human history.